p.m. If you're available to come and attend, show solidarity with Israel, please attend the synagogue tonight at 7 p.m. We're ready to begin our weekly Torah portion, and of course, this week we begin the Torah from the beginning. This is the first Shabbat of the year, Shabbat Bereshit. If you're in your blue Art Scroll Chumash, the one I'm using, it's page 2. If you're in any Chumash, it's chapter 1, verse 1. Now, it's fascinating, actually, with the times we find ourselves in now, the crisis, the tragic events that are unfolding before our eyes, that the very, very, very first verse of the entire Torah has a message that pertains to the time that we're in now. So, what is the famous opening verse of the Torah? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et aretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the Torah begins with the 6 days of creation. And following the 6 days of creation, the Torah then goes on to the day of Shabbat and says that God sanctified the seventh day as a day of rest. And hence, every Shabbat, we have the gift of Shabbat, which was established by God from the beginning of time, because God said 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. And indeed, the Kiddush that we say on Friday night, Yom HaShishi, Vayechul HaShamayim Ve'aretz V'chal Tzivam, on the sixth day, God completed all of his work that he had done, and then goes on to say that God rested and declared this day as a day of rest. That is the passage we open the Kiddush with every Friday night. But the first Rashi, now you know Rashi is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, 12th century French commentary, who wrote a commentary on the whole Chumash, but also wrote a commentary on the entire Talmud. And his name was Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. Now today we have surnames, and your surname is your last name, Goldberg, Feinberg, whatever your last name is. But in those days, your last name, your surname, was your father's name. So Rashi's name was Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, Rabbi Shlomo, the son of Yitzchak. And that's why he was called Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. However, the very first Rashi of the Torah, very appropriately, Rashi shows respect for his father, and the opening commentary that he writes on the entire Torah is a quote, a teaching from his father. Isn't that beautiful? He's going to write a commentary on the whole Torah. He's going to start with something he learned from his own father. So the very first words of the very first Rashi is Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, his father, Rabbi Yitzchak said the following. And what is the comment, the thought, the insight that he quotes from his father? He asks the following question, in essence. And the question is, we all know what the word Torah means. We just had a verse at the end of the Torah, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The Torah was taught to us through Moshe as an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. Now, what does the word Torah mean? Now, in English, you say Bible. Okay, I'm not sure what the word Bible means. If anyone knows the etymological root of the word Bible, by all means, share it with the group on the chat, because I'm not sure what it is. But I do know what the word Torah means. The word Torah is something that you're somewhat familiar with, because many of us, when we went to kindergarten, if we went to a Jewish school, or we went to elementary school, we had a Mora, a teacher. The word Mora is the same word of the word Torah, or Hora'ah. It's all one and the same. It means teacher, teachings. Your Mora is your teacher. Torah is teachings. Now, what do we mean by teachings? The literal meaning of the word Mora is not teacher. Rebbe is a teacher. When we say rabbi, the title rabbi just means a teacher. People sometimes think a rabbi has special powers. What a rabbi's primary role is to be a teacher of Torah. But the word Mora or Torah literally means instructions, guidance. So the Torah is a book of guidance, lessons, directives. That's a good word. Directives. It's life directives. Okay. In other words, the Torah is God's guidance, directives, lessons, how to live a spiritual, moral, righteous life. What things we shall do and what things we shall not do, especially as Jews. Okay, there are 7 Noahide laws for mankind, but the majority of the commandments are for the Jewish people. So it's God's manual for living for the Jewish people specifically, and more broadly for the entire world. So Rashi asks a very simple question that he quotes his father on. And the question is, why does the Torah begin with history? How the world came about. Now, granted, it's very important. Granted, it's very important. We want to know how the world came about, and we want to know that the world is not an accident. It's not a fluke. It's not a random, coincidence that the world is here. It didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen by accident, but rather there is a creator, a divine creator who designed and brought into existence all of life and mankind through Adam. And therefore our lives were authored and designed with a plan for life. Because if there's no God, that means there's no plan, there's no purpose, there's no meaning to it. It's just a random occurrence that happened because of some big bang that accidentally occurred and brought about a process of evolution. And here we are. There's no beginning, there's no end, there's no meaning, purpose, except what we attribute on our own to life. But there's no pre-planned order and architecture and design and goal of existence. We as Jews obviously don't accept that. We say, no, God created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbat, put us as human beings, created us in his image, as it says in the beginning when God created man, it was in his image. We are all in the image of God. We have divine qualities, and we are here to fulfill certain directives, lessons, purposes, to achieve certain specific goals here in this world. So Rashi's question is, if the book of the Torah is the book of mitzvot, commandments, the first commandment given to the Jewish people doesn't occur until the Jews are going out of Egypt in the book of Exodus, when God says, okay, this month shall be the first of the 12 months of the year. Rosh Chodesh should be a monthly observance. So Rashi says, my father asked the question, why doesn't the Torah begin with the first directive, the first mitzvah? This is a story. It's a history book. It's a story of history, what happened. And from the creation of the world, we're going to go on to the story of Noah, and then the story of, and first we're going to have Adam and Eve, then Noah, then Abraham. But is the Torah a book of, like, think about it in America, right? If you go to the library, there's the section of law books, and then there's the section of history. You don't have one book that has history combined with law. It's either a history book or a law book. Here, the Torah is beginning with history. And here we come to how this is all relevant to the times we find ourselves in right now. Rashi says that my father said the following, and I'll quote Rashi because nobody could say it better than his own words from his father, because it's a very, very timely and powerful message. Rashi says, my father asked, why did the Torah begin with the story of creation? Why didn't it start with the first commandment given to the Jewish nation, which is to keep the months of Rosh Chodesh, the monthly cycle of the new moon? Why did it begin with Bereshit? So Rashi says, quoting a verse from the book of Psalms, because God is giving empowerment to the Jewish people. How is he giving us empowerment? That if the nations of the world will say to the Jewish people, you are thieves because you conquered our land. we will respond to them that the entire earth belongs to God. He created it, and he gave it to whom he found fitting and suitable in his eyes. And therefore, since God is the creator of heaven and earth, God created the land. He is the, so to speak, landlord, the lord of the land, literally. And he decides which parcel of land shall go to which nation. And he chose this little tiny piece of land called Israel for the small nation of Israel. And therefore, if someone says to you, what right do you have to the land of Israel? You could give him a political answer. You could give him a historical answer. Your political answer would be, we followed the UN partition plan, and then the Arabs came to attack us, and we won all these wars, and we ended up conquering this land. You could give him a historical answer that we are a nation who lived in this land thousands of years before there was even a Muslim religion, before Muhammad came along. But you could give them a spiritual answer and a religious answer. And that is, everyone who studies the Bible, not just Jews, but universally, billions and billions of people study the Bible, know that God created the world. And in the Torah, it says that God told Abraham, this land I will give to you and your descendants, the Jewish people. So God, if you believe in the Bible, which half of the world's population does, then it says very clearly that the creator of the world chose this piece of land for the Jewish people. And therefore, our claim and our right to the land of Israel is divine. It's literally from God. And that is the reason Rashi says, quoting his father, that the whole Torah begins with the story of creation, even though there's no obligations or mitzvot in this story. It's just a story of what happened, what God made. Like, why do I need to know what God made on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5? If anything, just say God made the world. It's giving you the instructions and the details of how God created the world to enforce and empower us to know that the creator of the world designated this land for the Jewish people. And therefore, when we go up, when we have enemies who claim that we stole something from them, whether we could convince the world or certain segments of the population of the world, that's a different story. But the first thing is we have to know for ourselves what our rights are. We have to believe in our justified right to be in the land of Israel. And where does that stem from? Most famously, right here in the first verse of the entire Torah portion. So that's just fascinating that here we are dealing with, once again, the lie that we stole something from others when it's not true historically and factually. The Jewish people have been here, as we're going to read in the book of Genesis. Abraham walked the land and purchased the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, which is one of the most contested places in Israel. But yet it says very clearly that Abraham acquired it, and we even know the price that he paid to acquire it. Okay, so moving right along to now the actual story of the creation of the world. The very first letter of the Torah is the letter Bet. Bereshit. Now we all know Bet is the equivalent of B, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And many of the commentaries already have a question on the very first letter, let alone word of the Torah. And that's something to always think about, that when you study Torah, we examine not just every phrase or every sentence or every paragraph, not just that, we focus on understanding the meaning behind each word, and more specifically, each letter. And here's a great example. Now, in addition to that, why does it start with the letter Bet? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to start the Torah with the letter Aleph? And interestingly, we all know that when God came to give us the 10 Commandments, he began with the word Anochi. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And the word Anochi is, of course, the letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So if he used the Aleph for the first letter of the Ten Commandments, why didn't he use the Aleph for the first letter of the Torah? That's question number one. Question number two is, and I'll try to show it to you here, you may or may not notice that the letter Bet, which is the first letter of the Torah, is large. It's today on computers, you could choose your font size, and certain letters you can make large. Well, this is a large font for the letter Bet. Now, it's not just in your printed version, it's actually in the Torah, which means that in the tradition of how to write the Torah that was passed down from Mount Sinai, it said write the first letter big, a large font. And that's why in the Chumash it's printed big. And the question is, why is the letter Bet the first letter, not Aleph, not A equivalently? And why is it large? And there are many, many answers. One of the things you have to get used to when you learn Torah is that our rabbis say there are 70 faces to the Torah. So every question could have 70 different answers. And those 70 could continue. Talmud says like a rock that you break into multiple pieces. It keeps on splitting into more and more and more. So there's endless depth to the Torah. But because we could only maybe focus on one, we'll actually focus on two. One is that the letter Bet stands for Baruch. We all know every blessing starts with the word Baruch Atah. Baruch means blessed. So we want to start with the letter Bet because the letter Bet represents blessing. And therefore, by using the letter Bet, the Torah is telling us from the beginning that the Torah will lead to a life of blessings. So that's number one. But another beautiful answer is as follows. When we're going to go through the 6 days of creation, we're going to see that not only does God create something new every day, but every day he examines what he did, what he made, what he created, his work. And it says God saw that everything he made was good. It was good. There's only one time in the entire story of creation where God uses the word lo tov. In other words, instead of saying ki tov, that it is good, he says lo tov, it's not good. In other words, there's one thing God made or did in the 6 days of creation that he looked back and said, I did not do that right. It's not good. I need to fix that. I need to correct that. Now, that in itself is a lesson. You don't have to go any further. Just the idea that we should always review what we've done and acknowledge what we did right and be satisfied and gain contentment and appreciation for the good we've done, but also to acknowledge what we didn't do right. Because if God could admit, so to speak, that something I did was not good, I need to fix this, I need to repair it, I need to redo it, I need to mend the problem, surely we human beings could look at what we've done and say, you know what, maybe I didn't do it right. I need to change it, okay? So that's just a lesson unto itself. But what was the one time that God says, lo tov, not good? And God actually goes about repairing it. That was when God made man. God says the famous words in this week's Torah portion on day 6 of creation, lo tov, hiyot hadam labado. It's not good that I made man singular. Esel lo, I will make for him Ezer kenegdo, a helpmate, a partner alongside him. In other words, God said, man is not designed, it's not good for man to be alone. Everyone should have a partner or a friend or companionship. Loneliness is not good. It's not healthy to be lonely. You need to have friendship, companionship. And in the case of Adam, God then put Adam to sleep, took one of his bones, and fashioned another being, which was Eve, a wife for Adam. And here we have Adam and Eve. But in the original plan, there was no Eve. God then realized it was not good for man to dwell alone and made Eve. So therefore, we now go back to why the Torah begins with the letter Bet, and why is the letter Bet blown up, large? And the answer the rabbis give is that Aleph is one, singular. Bet represents already duality or plurality or other. And the goal of life is that one should relate to another. We all need each other. We're all codependent or coexisting, cooperation. We have to have companionship and social friendships, relationships, marriage. That's the best way for man to function in this world. And therefore, the letter Bet represents friendship. And to quote the Talmud, in English, they say, give me freedom or give me liberty or give me death, right? But the Talmud says something else. The Talmud says, O chavruta, o metuta, either friendship or death, meaning friendship and companionship and relationships are so essential that without it, it's almost as life is unbearable or not. Oh, give me friendship or give me death. In other words, what is life without relationships? And if you think about it, of course, we all know, we all have different kinds of relationships, whether we're married or not, whether we have siblings, parents, friends, we all need others. If we were put on a isolated island by ourselves, we wouldn't be able to function normally. One of the worst punishments, God forbid, even when someone's in prison, and which is a horrible condition, their freedom is taken away from them. The only thing worse than being in prison is being put into solitary confinement. Because at least in prison, you still have friends to talk to, people to associate with. But when you put into solitary confinement, that's the most painful experience at all. So why do we say this? We say this in a positive way. We say this in a positive way that we should realize that God designed us as social creatures to have relationships, to have interaction, to have friendship. And coming back tonight, when we're all in pain as a Jewish people, witnessing the horrors that have befallen our brothers and sisters in Israel, we come together tonight as a community to strengthen each other, to comfort each other, to grieve together. Because as someone said, that a joy shared is a joy doubled, but a pain shared is a pain cut in half, is halved. A grief shared is a pain cut in, is halved. And that's why with our brothers and sisters in Israel, all we can do is be with them and show them we care about them, we love them, and we're supporting them. We can't take away the pain of the bereaved families, but we could at least give them the comfort and the love of being present and showing up for them. So that is the idea of Bet, of friendship, of unity. And to just fast forward you to the next book of Shemot, we all know the story when Moses, his father-in-law, comes to the desert and he sees that Moses is single-handedly judging all the Jewish people. He says, you need to delegate other judges to assist you in judging and rendering decisions for the nation. And what does he say? He says to his son-in-law, it's not good what you're doing alone. In other words, once again, the idea of doing something by yourself without help from others, without teamwork, right? Without delegation, whether it's living alone socially, whether it's functioning as a leader, you always need others to join and help you. So that's just the very first letter of the Torah is Bereshit, symbolizing this idea of companionship and friendship. Okay? Now, what was the first thing God said? Vayom Elokim, God said, Yehi or, let there be light. Right away. On day one, God turned on the light, so to speak, okay? Let there be light. Now, there's the literal meaning, but it's also, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says it's figuratively as well. What does that mean? Rebbe says, when you start any project, you usually have a stated goal. You have a mission statement, as they call it. What is the objective of this endeavor? Okay. So the same thing applies here. What is the mission statement of life? God is creating life on earth. God is creating a universe. God is creating mankind, the human race. If you had to say, what is the mission statement? Today in the world of marketing, there's taglines, right? Every brand has a tagline that in a couple of words, they capture their whole message of what their stated goal of their product, organization, right, is. Nike says, just do it, right? Or Coca-Cola says, refreshing, whatever, There's always like a caption that encapsulates what the purpose is of this product, entity, organization, company, whatever. And here, the Lubavitch Rebbe says, if you want to know God's mission statement for creation, it's the very first two words God utters. What are the very first two words? Yehi or, let there be light. Now in English, it's a bunch of words. Let there be light. It's 4 words, but in Hebrew, it's Yehi or, let there be light. When you think about it, the whole purpose of life and creation is Yehi or, let there be light. Everything we do should bring light to the world. Light, of course, is a metaphor for enlightenment, knowledge, wisdom. It's a metaphor for love, like the light of the sun, warmth, radiance, joy. Our actions should always be to produce and create light. And what's so beautiful about the metaphor of light is that, light cannot be kept selfishly. When I turn on the light in the room or I light a fire, I can't say it's for me, it's my personal light. The Talmud says a candle for one is a candle for 100. Because just like when God shines the light of the sun, it doesn't shine into one person's window more than the next person's window. Everyone gets equal access to the light of the sun. The same thing is physically. When I light a fire or I put on a switch, everyone in the room benefits from that light automatically. And the same thing, what God is saying is, let there be light. You should be a light. Your actions should produce light. What does it mean to produce light? That it's not just for your personal benefit, but everyone in your surroundings is benefiting from that light. And, the famous idea that there's a Hasidic saying that there are some people who are righteous people in a fur coat. Called a tzaddik in pelts, a righteous person in a fur coat. What does that mean, a righteous person in a fur coat? So Hasidic philosophy or Hasidic ideology explains that when you're cold, you have 2 solutions. One solution is to put on a fur coat and keep yourself warm. The other solution is to light a fire in the room, right? Put up some fire. In the olden days, you had a fireplace, a lantern, and produce light, that warmth. Produce warmth that way, a fireplace. The difference is when I put on a fur coat, I'm warm, but everyone else around me is still cold. But when I light up the fireplace and I produce warmth through the fireplace, light, now everyone's warmed by that light. And what the message of Yehi Or is, always make sure that you are producing and creating light, that everyone can see and benefit from this light and from this warmth. And that's the very mission statement. Now, again, people always ask, people don't ask, but it's pointed out, like, why do we study the Torah over and over and again every year? We just finished it, and now we started again. We all read books. If you really like a book, you read it twice, maybe 3 times. But does anyone have a book that they read every single year of their life? From when they're a child, they never stop reading it every year. Now, I see Ken Abramowitz is on the Zoom, and he has a great line. He says every time he reads the Torah again, he says, hey, who snuck that verse into the Torah since last year? So obviously, we don't always process and observe every line in the Torah. So we're missing a lot of lines, maybe in commentaries. So we got to keep on combing through it to make sure we're getting everything. But even the verses you did read last year take on new meaning based on life circumstances this year, because the Torah may be the same every year, but you're not the same person, hopefully, right? You're a year older, you're a year wiser, and of course, life circumstances change as well. So the same verse that jumped off the page last year may not jump off the page this year, and a new verse may jump off the page. Now, I know what let there be light means for me, because right now we're witnessing the ultimate battle between light and darkness. Israel is a nation of light, produces, as I said, light, warmth, blessings for mankind in every realm, in every sphere. And we're dealing with an entity, Hamas, that is all about producing darkness, death, destruction, and not just for Israelis. As has been pointed out many times, there was a fellow that wrote a book called Son of Hamas. You may have heard of it. I don't remember his name, but his father was a Hamas leader, and he managed somehow to break away from that ideology and free himself from it. And he immigrated to America and he became a Christian, and he writes about the atrocities of Hamas. And he says, better than anyone else, the first victims of Hamas and the largest victims are the very Palestinians, the children who are being raised with this evil indoctrination of hatred and destruction. So if you talk about child abuse, that's what's going on. Whether it's the school systems or the textbooks or the media or the homes are taking these pure children and teaching them how to be evil, how to do these. When you look at these terrorists who came into Israel, 20, 30-year-old, they were once innocent little babies that could have been raised to be the most peace-loving, kind, generous, compassionate, empathetic human beings. Somebody took them and brainwashed them to the point that they now can act like savages, like animals, like inhumane, with no trace of humanity. Somebody ripped out their soul from them. And that happened through constant bombardment of doctrines and philosophies and ideologies filled with hate and evil and destruction. That's the greatest victims of, we tragically have suffered physically horrible destruction and death by the hands of these terrorists. But they are not just suffering physically, which they are, especially now that Israel is going to retaliate. And as Ken just said, they're like Amalek that have to be obliterated from the face of the earth because they are so ruthlessly evil, just like Nazism had to be defeated and crushed and obliterated. This has to be obliterated as well. But they're taking millions of children. Half the population in Gaza apparently is children. So if there's 2-point-something million people, there's 1 million children that are being destroyed spiritually, morally by these corrupt, evil people. And that's what people often forget, that their biggest victims are their own children who are being taught this. Nobody is born wanting to kill another person. This is taught evil, okay? So we are now dealing with the greatest battle in our time of the ultimate light against the ultimate darkness. And we have to remember that as a Jewish people, we are living up to our mandate to be creators of light, a light for the nations, be a light unto the nations. And we all know, and we're all very proud as Jews of the fact that, starting with Israel, is a light unto the nations. This tiny little nation is one of the major sources of some of the greatest breakthroughs in medicine, technology, Iron Dome, things that are protecting and saving lives all over the world. We all know that Israel is always the first to volunteer anywhere in the world that there's a humanitarian crisis. We all know the long list of Jewish Nobel Prizes who have enriched and enhanced life on earth for so many people, life-saving breakthroughs and so on and so forth. That's what we're here to do, to create light for humanity. As opposed to Hamas and similar entities like Iran, they are creators and exporters of death, destruction, pain, misery, tragedy. And the good thing we know is that when there's a battle between light and darkness, as King Solomon famously says in the book of Proverbs, Mi'at or docha harve choshech. Not only is darkness no match for light, but a little bit of light dispels a great deal of darkness, right? You have a room filled with darkness, and you turn on one light bulb or one candle, and suddenly you can see in the whole room. Because ultimately, light is more powerful than darkness. Darkness doesn't banish light, light banishes darkness. And therefore, we have to keep on being purveyors of light. And everything we do is a light. Every mitzvah is a light. Every kindness is a light. Every good deed is a light. And that's why, especially in these very dark times, it behooves us and it's incumbent upon us to add in our acts of light to illuminate this darkness. And one of the ways we illuminate the darkness is by shedding light on the evil for the world to see. And I think the world has seen. They'll forget very soon, I have no doubt. But at the moment, we have to make sure the world remembers what the face of evil looks like. Just like on 9/11, the world saw the face of evil. Because we get complacent, we slide back into whatever we're doing in our lives, and we forget how important the war against evil is and how evil these people actually are, that they could murder any human being, let alone little pure innocent children and elderly handicapped grandmothers and grandfathers. This is the sickest, most vilest, disgusting, savage group of people on the face of the earth. And unfortunately for us, they're our neighbors. But I think the resolve in Israel and the spirit and the will, and to know that we're doing a mitzvah by destroying these people, that unfortunately in a world that is unredeemed, that Mashiach has not come yet, it's left upon us to deal with this evil for the betterment of not just the Jewish people. Of course, as Hillel says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? We have to protect our community, our nation, our families, our land. But we're actually ridding them and their evil from the face of the earth for the betterment of all of humanity. Just like the world is better off without Nazism, and just like the world is better off without ISIS, the world or the Taliban or Al Qaeda, the world will be better off if Israel gets the job done with Hashem's help and eliminates the entire Hamas entity, that it should no longer be something that exists in this world. And not only will Israel obviously benefit from that, but the Palestinian people will benefit. The people in Gaza will benefit tremendously from that, first and foremost. There's so much to be said on this week's Torah portion. Obviously, we could barely scratch the surface, but I'm still looking at page number 2. So I'm just going to focus on God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And it was evening and it was morning, day 1. Okay. Now, we all know that in Judaism, morning follows night. So in America, on our Gregorian calendar, the day begins at 12 a.m. In Judaism, the day begins at a different time every day, you know. It all depends when candle lighting is, when sunset is, you know. So that's why we're the only calendar that has times in it, okay? Calendars are usually for days, weeks, and months, and years. Well, Jewish calendars has precise times. Candle lighting Friday night is this time. Shabbat ends at that time. There's a fast of Yom Kippur begins at this time, right? Down to the minute. You know, I don't know what time candle lighting is this week, but I know this past week it was 6:43. You know, so you always got to know exactly to the minute when Shabbat begins and when the holidays begin. Why? Because in Judaism, it all begins with nightfall. Now, it's interesting that you find something similar with the 7 days of the week. It doesn't say rest on the day of Shabbat and then you shall work for 6 days. It says work 6 days and then rest on Shabbat. It was evening and it was morning. And perhaps the message just in that, as we experienced night before day, is that night precedes day, meaning the darkness precedes the light. And you could be going through darkness and you know and you believe that there'll be a break of dawn, and as it says in the daily prayers, Or Chadash, a new sun will rise over Zion. In other words, right now we're going through a very, very dark period in Jewish life and history. But we have to know that just like the darkness is broken by the sunrise and the rays of the morning stars, which ultimately banish and vanquish the darkness, so too in our personal and communal lives. We always have to know that after the darkness comes the light. And yes, we can be going through very dark times. And 1 minute it could be very, very dark. And the next thing you see is a light starts to rise. And that's what hope is about. Hope is about that the darkness isn't permanent. It's temporary. And it's followed by a greater light and a greater appreciation for light. So, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you may not appreciate the light as much because you've had it for 5-6 hours. But in the morning, when you're up and dark, suddenly the light comes up and it gets bright outside, you appreciate it more. And we are going to see light rise. There'll be new light, greater light. Just like after the Holocaust, which was the ultimate darkness for the Jewish people. We saw the return to Eretz Yisrael after 1900 years of exile. So remember always that following the darkness comes the light, the sun, and wait for the sun. And King David in the book of Psalms, he actually uses that metaphor. He says, I yearn to you, God, as I yearn for the morning dawn light. Just like I know momentarily the light will rise. It may take a few more minutes, it may take a few hours, but eventually the morning dawn will come. That's how my soul waits for God, like for the new dawn of the morning light. And that's what we're praying for, and may it come speedily and soon. And I see Sherry Siskin is on our call, and I know she represents Shari Tzedek Hospital, correct, in Israel. And Sherry, we would like to hear from you at some point, what the hospitals in Israel need, whether it's if we could help, obviously financially, but if we could help with equipment. I want you to know, Sherry, there are a lot of medics who have been asking me if there's any need that they would be willing to fly over and volunteer in the hospitals or on the first responders, on the ambulances or whatever. So we, everyone is looking to do what they can. We have retired doctors who are happy to go travel to Israel and volunteer. And we'd love to hear from you as well. Maybe you could let me know afterwards, one way or another, what is needed. We don't want to do things that are not needed, but whatever may be needed. So, the beautiful thing about Torah is you could look at any page of the Torah and see so many beautiful messages and lessons that we can see and appreciate. One other idea I want to just share here is that there is a pattern in all 6 days of creation. And that is that every day of creation is a 3-step process. The first step in the process is Vayomer Elokim, God said, let there be. Day 1, he said, let there be light. Day 2, let there be a firmament to separate between heaven and earth. Day 3, let there be vegetation. Day 4, let there be the sun and the moon. Every day, God started out with a goal, with a stated objective. Let there be. Now, I just want to touch on and brush on the idea that God doesn't have a mouth and he doesn't have vocal cords, and he doesn't say, let there be. It's all metaphoric, so we can relate to it. Now, what does it mean metaphorically? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a Hasidic, Kabbalistic understanding. What's the difference between thought and speech? The difference is that your thoughts are your personal domain. They're in your being, in your mind, in your heart. They are contained for yourself. The minute you speak, you are now projecting a bit of what's in your soul. Now, words can never capture adequately what you're really thinking or really feeling, but to the extent that vocabulary is able to communicate a condensed, limited understanding. Now, the more articulate you are, the more you could describe your thoughts and feelings, and the more someone else can capture your thoughts and feelings. But before you go to the domain of speech, everything is internal for yourself. The minute you start communicating, you are now sharing what you have within you, your feelings, your emotions, your thoughts, your soul, you're now sharing that with others, whether you're talking to one person or 100 people or 1,000 people, right? Now think of God. God has metaphorically, because we're in God's image, the way we understand God is by thinking about our construct as human beings. Just like we have thought, God has thought. Thought means what God has within himself contained, which is infinite. But now God says, okay, let me project that and share that with others. A part of myself will be projected outwardly in a limited fashion that the others can now relate to me. Until you speak to me, I can't relate to you. I could look at you, but I have no idea what your thoughts are, who you are, what your feelings. I don't understand who you are. Now that you speak to me, I get a glimpse of who you are. Same thing with God. God says, let me project through speech, metaphorically, the creation of the world. The creation of the world will give mankind a way to relate to me, to understand who I am, what I am. And part of my essence will be projected into a separate entity. Now, when you speak, your words become something outside of yourself, a separate entity, right? Today, so much so that I could capture your words in a recording and it could live on forever because those words have now been created as a separate entity of yourself. It doesn't diminish who you are as a person, your words. It just allows others to have a connection to you through your words. And the words you say live on. The people who heard your words can take those words and hold on to them for the rest of their lives. As many times people who lose loved ones hold on to the words of love and affirmation and guidance that they were given by the loved ones. Well, God is projecting a part of himself. That's what it means. And God said, metaphorically. There's a lot to be said about that, but just wanted to clear that up. But then there's step 2. After God says something, the next statement is, and it was so. In other words, it came to be, it came to pass, it occurred. Whatever God said was created. It was done. And then the third step in every day is God observed what he did. Vayara Elokim, whatever the blank of that day is, the light or whatever. And he saw that it was good. Now, everything in the Torah is a prototype or a format or a guide for how we should live our lives, because we're supposed to be in the image of God. And what we're being taught is that there's a 3-step process. You know, one of the great joys of life is human creativity. Whatever level of creativity you're creating, and whatever realm you're creating in, there's a tremendous amount of joy in being like God, because the more we're in the image of God, why do people get so much joy when they create something? Now, creating could be a physical creation, like building something, designing something, painting something. It could be intellectual creation, like coming up with a business plan or a strategy or whatever it is. Or it could be creating a child. It could be creating a garden. It could be anything, right? But there's 3 steps to every part of creation. Now, the first 2 are obvious, but the third one is much less obvious. The first one is you need a goal. Let there be. You have to start with a desire. What do I want to create, right? Nothing happens without an imagination, a plan, an idea, a vision. You have to have that let there be moment. Oh, if only there was this. Now you have to implement it. Now, there are a lot of people who are very good at vision. I mean, they come up with a dozen ideas a minute, but they don't know how to implement anything. That's why sometimes in companies, you have some people who come up with the concepts and other people who carry it out. Because some people are good at giving birth to ideas and visions, but they have no idea how to implement it. Other people have less creativity of coming up with new ideas, but if you give them an idea, they know how to take it and bring it into fruition. So there's let there be, and then and there is. Now, it also could be a question of determination. You may say, oh, I wish there was this or wish was that, but you don't have the willpower or the determination or the perseverance to bring it out, to do it, to actually implement it. So those are the first 2 steps. And we all know there could be a disconnect between let there be and there was. You could live your whole life with, oh, if only there was this in my life, or only if this was accomplished, if only I did that, but you never do it. There's some people like their whole life, I want to go back to school to learn this, but they never do it. Or I want to do whatever I want to do, but I never get around to doing it. So there has to be the discipline, the diligence, the perseverance, the knowledge of how to execute, as they say, your plan, your idea, your let there be moment has to transform into and there was. But here's the third point, and this is equally important. After God creates something, he then has one more step, and that is God observed what he had done, and it was good. In other words, God confirms, and God acknowledges or recognizes or appreciates the good in what was created. And I think what that is saying is that, sometimes there's a lot of joy in an idea, a vision. There's a lot of joy in implementing that idea, but then you have to sustain what you've created. And that's where is the third step, to see the good, to continuously draw out the good. I think the best example is children, right? Couple gets married, they say, let's have a child. Let there be, right? Then they go and they conceive and give birth to a child. But that's where your work really begins. Now that you had a plan and you brought it to fruition, there's a beautiful baby in your arms. Now you have to spend the rest of your life saying, and it is good. In other words, you have to see the good in the child. You have to develop the good in the child. You have to draw out the good in the child. You have to nurture the good in the child. That's an ongoing activity. And that's not, obviously, it's very obvious with children, right? You have to give them constant love and nourishment and take care of it and see the good, right? See the potential, right? But that's true in everything in life, whether it's any creation. Yeah, you could make a piece of artwork and maybe you don't have to develop it. But if you have an organization, if you have a business, if you have a project, right? You can't just build it, create it, and then walk away from it. It requires constant infusions of care, of love, of positivity, of nurturing the potential of that. Okay. And that's so important in everything we do in life. We have to make sure that we don't just think, okay, done, I checked that off my box. It's not going to continue to flourish. We call that sometimes maintenance, okay, in a very not colloquial term, but in a very mundane things, we say, oh, you got to provide maintenance for your car or maintenance for this or that. But there's spiritual maintenance and there's emotional maintenance, right? And that's the time and the effort. If you say, I want to be friends with this person, that's such a wonderful person. So you have a plan, you go out and you make that friendship. But if you don't keep on investing in that friendship and seeing the good in that friendship and developing it, the friendship will be lost eventually, right? Everything needs spiritual maintenance, emotional maintenance, and that's true in every sphere of life. There has to be let there be, and there was. And then step 3 is see the good, develop the good, appreciate the good. And, again, like all of you, my mind is on Israel. So I'm just going to tie this back to Israel and then we'll conclude. And hopefully I'll see you at 7:00 tonight. One of the sad things, we do have to be honest with ourselves. I know it's not the time to deal with this now, but we know that this year was a year of tremendous division amongst the Jewish people. And we saw some pretty ugly things happen, including on Yom Kippur at a service in Tel Aviv. And I think we had this vision, let's create the land of Israel, a huge vision. It was Herzl's vision to begin with, right? But then we actually implemented it. We came home, we created a modern state. But then we stopped putting in that level of care and love and determination. In other words, we started taking it for granted. We forgot the miracle. The fact that Jews could turn against each other. It's okay to have political differences. It's okay to have disagreements. That could be very healthy. But the minute there's Jew against Jew, there's hatred amongst Jews, there's infighting amongst Jews. It means we forgot how good it is that we have this gift of Israel. We forgot to see the good, the blessing, the overwhelming positive aspect that after thousands of years of persecution, we now have our own homeland with our own army to defend ourselves. If there's no IDF, these Hamas terrorists would have gone on to kill, God forbid, 1 million Jews. They don't have a problem. They're like Nazis. They could kill 1 million Jews. They don't care. They have zero value for life. The only thing that stands between us and their death wish is our own sovereignty in the land of Israel. And how could we forget that blessing? And that's what we have to remember going forward. We have to see the good. Stop focusing on all the bad. There's negative, there's challenges, there's disagreements, fine. But the overwhelming picture is positive, is good. We're the most fortunate Jewish generation of Jews that we witnessed and experienced the biggest miracle in 2,000 years. And instead of seeing the good and saying, Ki Tov, this is good, we got distracted. And when we got distracted, unfortunately, that gives our enemies the upper hand to a certain point. So we can't cry over the past, but we could only learn the lessons and make sure that going forward, we have to all realize that if we don't see the good and acknowledge and celebrate it and appreciate it, then even if we've made the greatest accomplishments and creations and tremendous strides in our generation, it can be lost, God forbid, if we don't nurture it and continue to invest emotionally and spiritually in who we are as a Jewish people in the land of Israel. So with prayers and thoughts for our brothers and sisters in Israel and whoever's available, unless, for some reason you can't make it, hopefully everyone should come out tonight. And as we said, when we come together, that gives strength, that gives healing, and that brings blessings. And we're praying for better days ahead for the Jewish people. So thank you all for dialing in. This is the first Torah portion. If we stay on track every week, we'll get to study the Torah cover to cover, God willing, until we get to next Simchat Torah again. And hopefully very soon we'll have good news. Thank you all, and may our Torah study be in the merit of our brothers and sisters in Israel and our soldiers and all those who need a refuah shalema. Take care, everyone. Bye.